I now call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:31 p.m. Would you please call the roll?
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed? Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, thank you, Connor, for your working behind the scenes to produce our broadcast, which is being broadcast on Channel 20. And I'd like to remind everyone to please hold your questions until after each of the presentations as we go forward. Meeting minutes from April 6th. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes? If not, and I see none, is there a consensus to approve? So seen, thank you. As we have recognitions tonight, the internal, external stakeholders portion of the meeting will be moved to the beginning. Mr. Siegel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very kindly. Hey.
What?
Not just good, just marveling at the magic of technology.
Oh, because you have the button.
All right, good evening. The important work of ensuring equity in our system is the work we all need to participate and be engaged in. This work is also being done at various levels in our organization, and I'm going to show you how that is laid out in a few slides. This is a new way of working, a new way to approach potential solutions to our problems around equity, which is listening to the system, listen to the people who are actually being impacted, and most importantly, to look through the lens of our students. We plan to continue these listening sessions into the future. I'm going to briefly share some information from our most recent listening sessions, but before we do, I'm going to review a couple of slides that I have shown and will continue to show. So this is our equity imperative, which is to create learning environments that work for all of our students and interrupt the predictability of student outcomes based on zip code. We are going to see this come up again in a later presentation tonight. So this is something that is going to be good to keep in mind. You'll also see that our equity challenge, our African-American students are furthest away from this now, and our system is not serving our African-American students particularly well. So who are we engaging? We are and have been listening to students, to teachers and staff, and to administrators. You'll notice that we have some TBDs up there. Those are going to be parents and community leaders. We have as yet not reached out to them and made them part of this discussion. We are instead focusing on those stakeholders with whom we have our most direct connection. Our purpose and our goals is to listen and learn. From that information, we are going to find out what works and what doesn't work. And from that information, figure out where we go and how we can build a system that works better for everybody. This is a new way of working and a new approach to engaging our staff and students. What makes this particularly interesting is that there are so many aspects of the entire school district that's engaged in this conversation. And a key part of that conversation, of course, is listening. You know, I'm thinking about one particular student, and I wasn't really sure how this was going to go, these listening sessions, you know, all done by Zoom. But as we wrapped up the student listening sessions for the year, we had one student who said she was really going to miss this. She realized that this was an opportunity for her to be able to speak in a safe place. Clearly, this is the sort of approach that I think is going to work well for many of our students, and I look forward to continuing this approach as we go forward. At the last committee of the whole meeting, we had a conversation about this, but without the graphic. And I believe it was Ms. Detman who had suggested that sometimes it would be nice if we could just tear down the damn fence. But this is a really good graphic as to what targeted universalism looks like. I don't personally believe that we can just tear down the fence. The fence, to me, symbolizes the education that we are providing. And it really, I guess maybe a better way to say it is it's the seat where the student sits. Tearing down the wall or the fence would end up removing our accountability. Instead, we need to look at the students who are trying to see over that fence and connect with them and figure out how to make sure they're getting a clear vision of what's beyond. In the last meeting, I mentioned in the student listening sessions, some feedback from the students regarding our graduation rate. In this particular meeting, we asked the students, what does it look like when things are going right, when a teacher gets it right? And we did get some feedback in this regard. And I'm definitely going to let these comments speak for themselves. We want to share these comments with you just to give you a sense of some of the things we've heard. This is still a relatively small sample size, and we are not suggesting that this is the way the majority feels about these or any of the other comments that we're about to run through. But we did want to share some positive feedback from the students that we engaged with around what does good teaching and learning look like through an equity lens. We have had a staff listening session as well, and we showed them the graduation rate graphic to get their feedback. This particular slide was a comment that we had asked for more clarity from the staff. And here's what they shared with us. We then, sorry. We then asked as another problem of practice, how do we recruit more African American students to become teachers and take advantage of the RU pathway? And here are some of their comments. But before I move on, I do want to note that the RU pathway was just getting legs when I got on the board 5 years ago. And I think it had pretty great support and continues to. And this graphic does show the effort that the school district has put into recruiting a teacher force that's going to be more representative of our student body. Is this where I want? Wait, yes, here we go. So what's next? We are scheduling one more meeting with African American staff who want to continue discussion on this topic. But this is where we intend to go over the next year. Definitely we need to listen to administrators. We need to have more listening sessions, no, actually with all groups. But we need to incorporate administrators into these listening sessions. But building a larger listening teams for a greater sample size, I think is going to be really key for us to best understand the directions we need to go and the system that we need to design. And we need to engage more teachers and principals in participating and recruiting students to engage. But these are our plans for the next year, and we still have a lot of work to do. We have not arrived at any conclusions as of yet, nor determined any themes or trends, or are prepared to make any recommendations. However, I guess I wanted to, especially following the last presentation, which was not quite so cheerful, indicate that what we are definitely hearing from all of these listening sessions is the need for connections to be made, primarily in the classroom, between the teachers and the students. And I feel like this is something where we have a lot of potential. It's been my experience that teachers, by their nature, are largely connection-making people. And I think that they definitely have a lot of area that they can explore in making connections with more of our students to help them feel more engaged with the education that's being offered them. That is the end of the first part of the presentation. Would anybody happen to have any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so I noticed on the slide that mentioned a question that took place during the staff listening session that asked, how do we get more Black students basically involved in the RU pathway? And from what I gathered from the response, it said that Black students need to see more Black teachers, correct?
That definitely has been a a topic that has been discussed. It would be very, very helpful if there were teachers with whom students could identify that easily or that directly. It would help. The difficulty is in finding teachers of any stripe right now.
Right. And I get that part about there being a lack of the teachers, Black teachers right now. But I guess I'm curious on what other alternatives have we looked at in the meantime? Because being someone that works for like a community organization where we have representation and we have those connections similar to that teachers have with students, I think it would be helpful to expedite getting community leaders involved in the conversation. Like, where are we at with that? Is that going to be happening soon? Or like, I guess I would like more clarity on that.
What the recruiting of teachers is going to look like specifically is going to be difficult for me to articulate in a short amount of time. But we did have a presentation, I believe it was at the last board meeting, from Mr. Zedeker.
Yeah, so our recruitment team does engage in community work in terms of involvement of outside for help with recruitment, as well as not only recruitment, but for support when we bring new teachers in. We've identified that as a gap for retention. A lot of those processes were put in place pre-COVID, and we were just getting started. A lot of that revolved around connections with the 5 selected HBCU partnerships that we focused in on from a recruitment effort. But we've engaged some of our ministers as well as other community members, Lana Tasha Bell and Tabitha Sims, in their work with the community. Certainly hasn't come to fruition yet in terms of the number of African-American teacher candidates that we want to see, but that process has just begun, and we will look to try to pick that up as we engage in more face-to-face and opportunities for that involvement.
Thank you.
I would also add, we did take some additional steps to be more competitive in the recruiting market. We have housing incentives that we've added. We can get up to $9,000 of incentives there for housing and for different hard to fill areas. We also have made some additional investments in a paid student teaching experience and housing for student teachers while they're getting paid to student teach. So we do feel like we are poised to have something to offer as we do recruit out of the region. And then finally, one other issue we are attempting to do is make sure that money is not the core obstacle for being in the RU pathway. The RU pathway does offer a free master's degree and reduce the undergraduate cost from $30,000 down to $5,000. But for that last $5,000, we have undertaken some private fundraising and have that partnership with RAM. We were able to have 2 RAM scholars last year. This year we are only going to have 1, unfortunately. And we're hoping to be able to have, we've raised more money basically than we have student candidates right now. So when we have the follow-up conversation with the staff, part of what we're going to be talking about is how early in the process do we need to go and what types of actions do we need to take with middle school, upper elementary students, because we have a sophomore, junior, and senior 3-year pathway that is pretty heavily populated with African-American students, but we're having a real hard time converting those students into selecting Rockford University as their choice. And I think we're going to hear more as we talk to staff and students about why that is. We're going to keep this as a reoccurring question, but some of it has to do with direct advice that students are getting from their families about returning to the Rockford community. Some of it has to do with not going into education as a profession. We've had past issues with admissions requirements, which we've largely been able to address. So this has been a big, complex local issue. And then when we look at national trends, our country produced more African-American teachers in 1990 than it does now. There's a national crisis with African-Americans going into the teaching profession. And so the recruiting process for certified teachers. So one other area we are going to be looking into and exploring is how do we convert some of our existing employees who are really excelling at working with students, like our parent liaison positions, our paraprofessionals, et cetera. We are exploring the process of what it would look like to have a conversion to a bachelor's degree while working with students, so we could perhaps get some quicker wins with community members that way as well. So we're going to certainly be looking at a lot of things and attempting to land a more effective recruiting strategy. This strategy is working extremely well with Latinx students. We're seeing about 10 students per year in the RU pathway pipeline, but again, we're sitting at 1 or 2 for African-American students, so we're not accomplishing our core goal there. So a lot of work to do and a lot of other ways we have to do it. One thing we've seen with national research is that non-traditional teaching pathways where, like we're talking about with converting existing people who work with students who do not have a bachelor's degree or a degree in teaching into a teaching degree, those do tend to be more successful programs in terms of turning out African-American teachers. So that is another grow your own concept we will be exploring moving forward, possibly could come before the board as we flesh that out.
Thank you for the input, appreciate it. As far as state conversations goes, this is where the presentation really picks up pace. Since the last meeting, we have not had any conversations with our representation, but it's going to pick up, it's going to get a lot busier over the next few weeks. Nothing new here. These are still going to be the top talking points. And there will be much more to report in this area at our next committee of the whole meeting. Are there any questions on the state conversations?
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, what was the criteria for who you were engaging at the state level?
For the upcoming meetings, it was those with whom we have not already had a conversation because we have already spoken with Dave Severson, Joe Sosnowski. We had one conversation already with Dave Vella, which is largely how we came up with those particular talking points that are going to be pertinent to the board. We do have another conversation coming up with Dave Vella as we continue to examine our trades programs in the schools. I was told that he was just visiting at Guilford and was very pleasantly surprised at the success of the trades programs there, in particular with our buildings programs.
What kind of expectations do we have coming out of our individual sessions with the legislators?
That they are going to remain very engaged in the education conversation and have 205 on the top of their minds as they are making policy. They are setting a budget to make sure that funds continue to flow with as little resistance as possible.
Okay. And will we have another round with Severson and Sosnowski, I would hope?
I would certainly hope that we will continue having conversations with them as well.
Okay. And then would it be, I would say, an expectation that you would come back and report any specifics like you're doing tonight about Representative Vella saying he was interested in that?
Yes.
So you'll come back? Okay.
For sure.
I think the one thing I'll say is I would be interested in the results of the conversations. You know, what was agreed to. I mean, we have our priorities. How does that match up with what the legislators have for their priorities?
Is that in your report?
I'm sorry? And that's the end of the report?
Okay, so
Yeah,
you
thank
don't
you.
have any recognitions?
No.
That was labeled on here. Thank you so much. And number one, I apologize for my phone. It kind of reminds everybody to turn them off. Couldn't even find the darn thing. And number two, something else about that I can't remember. Don't get old because you can't remember things. No. I know what it was. When you said, here's where we're going to pick up the pace, and I chuckled, it was because I knew that meant you were going to get going faster. And it was not
yes,
about
and
what
there was just not a whole lot to cover in the state conversation because they've been very busy with their session and we haven't had the opportunity to engage.
Sure. So I wasn't making light of what you were saying. So thank you so much. Next on our agenda is the Performance Monitoring Committee. And Mr. Connor is going to take that on. He'll lead us with this portion. Mr. Connor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. First item is Board Policy 4.10, which is Operations, Business, and Fiscal Management. The Government Finance Officers Association, as part of their budget book checklist, requires that the district's financial policy includes the definition of a balanced budget. I'm sure interesting reading for all, if I might say so. Board Policy 410 requires, to the extent possible, the budget be balanced as defined by the State Board of Ed, but does not include the definition. That is also a shocker from my point of view. The policy now includes this definition from the Illinois State Board of Education. This item will return for a vote at the May 11th board meeting. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, well, that's a surprise. The budget seems to always have so many questions. The next is the Student Code of Conduct. And Ms. Jennifer Lawrence, Executive Director of Student Services, will present the updated Student Code of Conduct for the 2021-22 academic year. And she will provide a brief overview of this year's revisions and then is available for questions. Ms. Lawrence.
Oh, okay. Clicker one. Thank you. Good evening. I'm here tonight to discuss proposed changes to the Student Code of Conduct, some of which you'll have to be a little patient with me. I've been in this job about 2 months. Illinois School Code requires the school board with a teacher-parent advisory annually to look at the Student Code of Conduct, make any revisions to policy and procedures. Also part of that, those requirements is called a 15-day rule. And that means that we need to provide the Student Code of Conduct to students within 15 days of the first day of school or within 15 days of enrollment. So if we have a transfer student, that would be within those 15 days. And then we also need to provide education to our students about the content and the policies within that Student Code of Conduct. As you can see, our timeline is pretty tight. This is how it's been in the last several years. The parent-teacher advisory is invited to public meetings. This year, those were Zoom, and they were posted on our district website. Building principals are also asked to invite parents that they know would be interested in attending Student Code of Conduct meetings. We go through the red line revisions. We utilize the legal department to make sure that our wording is correct. We come to the Board of Education for approval, and then we move, once that's approved, that we move forward with our translation and printing, which is quite a big event. And then to be ready for distribution at registration and to have administrator training prior to the school year beginning. And I've highlighted some notable revisions, and you can see that many of these revisions are riddled throughout the Code of Conduct. As we use terms such as bullying, we refer back to some revisions in our bullying policy. That's why there's multiple pages. The first one is we did a pretty big overhaul of our computer violations. Some of that came from our building principals with the increased use of devices this last school year. And what we did was we redefined the definitions. They were the same definition for all levels. So for a minor violation and a major violation, we changed that definition and tweaked those a little bit. Basically, what the difference is a minor for elementary and for secondary is the intentional misuse of the device, but it doesn't cause a significant disruption in the school operation or the district operation. A major violation would be, again, intentional misuse that causes harm to the district or the school, so such as what we dealt with the ransomware, if it was intentional. Those are the two big differences in that code change. Failure to attend or complete assigned discipline was very vague. It was just a statement that said if you failed to serve, it could be escalated to the next level. And we revised that to say that we're going to provide interventions for the student. And if they miss 3 of those interventions, then the building administration could move that or escalate that to the next level of discipline. Arson and attempted arson was just language change enabled to facilitate based on an incident that occurred. Bomb threats, we changed the latter half to include if a student calls in a bomb threat, but they truly perceive and they have information that is a credible threat, that wouldn't be considered a code of conduct violation for that student. And then we also, in the latter part of that code, we defined what school property was. It just said school grounds, and we defined what school property would include. Events, even events off campus. Next page. Battery, we made sure that we defined who emergency medical care was referring to. That has been very vague in our policy. And our definition is that you have to have treatment outside of our school nurse. So not a Band-Aid or just a checkup from our school nurse. It would require going to another facility to be checked out. Non-consensual, consensual or unlawful recording, in that we just added possession and distribution. For weapons, we added the discretion regarding toys or fake arms, fake firearms, fake destructive devices for mandatory recommendation to the school board. So some of the toys that we've been seeing that some of our very, very young students are bringing as toys, then my department and the school principal has the discretion to not bring those as weapons as a mandatory recommendation for expulsion. In the bullying form, we changed parent signature to signature of person reporting. So that can be anyone that is reporting bullying, not just a parent. And then riddled throughout the policy, it's been a policy, but not in print, that there must be a bullying report on file for any bullying incident or suspected bullying. In the last 2 months, been doing having conversations with quite a few people and thinking of ways that we can reduce discipline in our district. And one of the things that, as a former special education director in this district, I was very connected with discipline. So students with disabilities and discipline. And one of the things that we, in my department, in my previous department, special education, we house social workers, school psychologists, the school nurse, et cetera. Some of these other positions were housed within another department, and there's not been any collaboration or coordination with these positions. And so it was the number one on my list to get done. We've already had several meetings. We're trying to look at how to not duplicate positions, how to not overlap them. At what point do each of these positions come into play for a student that is struggling behaviorally within our school system? And then how they would move up into a tiered system and who would be responsible at those levels. We've got quite a bit of work done already. Plan to have that done by the beginning of the school year to make sure that we can train our staff, which would include summer professional development. Prevention and correction of misbehavior. My team has been working with Amy Gannon, the director of MTSS, to look at how these positions fit within the structure of MTSS. That's quite a bit of work. And the last part is just district-wide professional development. So some of the professional development that my school social workers are able to receive, we don't offer that to our, say, behavior intervention specialists. So we're looking at those position frameworks to determine what is going to be required for all of those positions so that they have better support themselves as professionals, and they have more tools in their bags to work with students in our district. And I will take any questions.
Ms. Pearson?
Thank you. So this, just for clarity, this is simply revision. So this is not, every year it is, the student code of conduct is reviewed and then any necessary revisions are made.
Correct.
So this, the revisions that are being made now will go into effect this fall?
Correct.
Okay. And I do have a question about one moment. Thank you. The failure to complete assigned discipline. Can you elaborate a little more on that? You explained that if they missed, was it like 3, then they would, they move to another level of discipline?
So they could. So currently, if you missed, let's say, a detention, you could be then escalated to the next level in discipline. What we would like to do is put a buffer in there so that interventions have to occur before you're escalated immediately to the next level of discipline. So for example, if I miss a detention, then I could move from a detention to whatever's next. Okay. Instead, what we'd like to do is provide interventions in the middle of that. So if you're failing to comply over and over and over again, we're at least attempting to do things before we're escalating that discipline. Does that help? Make sense?
It does. It does. So can you reiterate on who's the team that is a part of the intervention?
So currently at the schools, the assistant principals, the school social worker. In my tenure as the executive director of special ed, I increased the social workers to have a minimum of 1.0 in every school. So that offers them additional time outside of special education minutes and work that they are required to do to work with general education students as well. So they might be part of the team, the school psychologist, depending on what the issue might be, maybe the nurse if it's a medical issue. So our student support team really are non-teachers.
Okay.
In those support roles, we have behavior intervention specialists now, parent liaisons, attendance specialists, trauma therapists that we contract out for.
Okay, and this may be an HR question, but how many social workers do you know, if you know, that we have it on a part of our team?
48.3.
Okay. And they are made available from elementary to high school? From
early childhood throughout our 18 to 22 special education program. There's a little bit in that program. There's not a lot of need, but they're we have 1.0 in every single school. At our middle school and high school, we have a bit more. At some of our schools that have our self-contained special education programming, so it's just a self-contained classroom of special education students, we have a little bit more to support that programming as well.
Okay, so social workers are only made available for special education?
They were
or in addition to?
They were previously. They are now in addition to. They have time built into their day to work with general education students as well.
Okay.
So for example, school A has X number of special education students with X number of minutes in their IEPs as a total for the school. We look at that and we're able to say to the building principal, this much time in their week, they should be working with special education. This much time you have them, build them into your school day.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Siegel.
Thank you. Could you explain a little bit about the conversation you have with students and parents about filing a bullying report, the importance of it?
Well, I've not had any of those conversations outside being the principal. And I don't think that, and this is one of the reasons we want to do some real targeted professional development for students, teachers, and parents, is to look and for them to be able to understand what some of the warning signs might be, and make kids feel comfortable about knowing who they can go to disclose, having that personal conversation within classrooms with the students. Most likely, if they have a good relationship with the teacher, they're going to disclose to that teacher, and then having that teacher know what to do next. And so I don't know what has been provided in the past. I just know where we want to move with that going forward.
Thank you. I'm just noting that all bullying offenses will require having a bullying report on file. It hasn't been such a big issue this year, but in the past, certainly bullying has been one of the top discipline categories. And this year, knowing that that report will be required to be filed, I think it's going to be really important that students understand that just saying bullying without the actual report isn't going to necessarily help them. So I think it really is going to be important that that conversation be had in earnest, as we have a lot more of the students coming back to the building this fall.
I just wanted to add that legal has been doing this training in support of student services for at least the past 4 years. And every year we discuss the importance of the bullying form as a part of the policy that's mandated by statute. We talk about how bullying can disrupt the provision of the free and appropriate public education that's required. We talk about how bullying reports can be submitted anonymously and should be submitted by staff and district employees if they witness bullying. And one of the first things that we do when matters are brought to our attention are to request copies of those documents to ensure that most of the buildings are complying.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, on slide 6, about a couple, 2 or 3 questions. Number one is, on these positions that you mentioned in the first part, out of curiosity, is that an increase of staffing? How do the numbers that you anticipate for next year, do you think, compare with prior years?
This is a snapshot of what is current, not necessarily a discussion on what might be needed, looking at student data. We're not quite there yet. What I've done in the past is increase the social workers based on conversations that I've had with building principals and looking at special education data and student discipline data. Do I anticipate maybe needing more positions? Yes. Okay. So I assume that in terms of a metric that we'll track, and I assume it's hours, days, whatever metric it is, versus how many people we have, so that at some point, I would assume during the school year, you would have had enough data to see how many people you have in these various roles, who's more successful, and filling any gaps. So we should get a follow-up on this. I would assume maybe I'm not dictating, I'm asking, probably mid-year in the next school year. My team is looking at quarterly reports. Okay. So that we're looking at prescribed interventions, so students that meet a certain threshold and are prescribed something such as a student group, how that student is performing in that student group, what their attendance rate is in that student group, and any anticipated decrease in any discipline. So if you're not going to class and you have to go to a student group because you we need to help you get to class on time, did that group actually reduce your tardies? Yeah. Okay, good. So we'll get really some leading indicators in there along with it. Then on the prevention and correction of misbehavior, are we going to change any of the stats that we have today, or do we have basically the same metrics that we're going to be tracking on all those that you? I anticipate looking at that a little closer. I know that some of the data that was pulled, I'm struggling with identifying how that was pulled. So looking at, the state report card, the Office of Civil Rights information that we do receive on the state report card, as well as internal data, will give us a better idea of where we are as a district, where we are at the school level, and then we can disaggregate that data down to students. Okay. General question for the administration, and maybe it's Dr. Jarrett. Will these kinds of metrics be a part of the standard, if you will, building principal reports that we anticipate getting?
That is unlikely going to be one of our standards of practice. Okay. I don't think that at that level, but I think you will be able to make some connections potentially to some of the standards of practice being connected to doing this work well. In other words, this is too granular of a level, but if you go up a level.
So we would see it reflected essentially if we wanted to look at it to see essentially which buildings are more effective. It's not like it's part of that standard report, but we could get that. So I guess my point would be if something were off track or doing well for that matter, we would have a good idea. That
Yeah, I'm
makes sense?
looking for improvement.
Yeah, okay. And then on the last one, and I think Mr. Siegel basically said this, but because we have the professional development on the bullying, self-harm and so forth, drugs, alcohol, I really have a similar question on the metrics and all that, because I can't remember, and I apologize. Do we have a fair amount of metrics today on those topics, or is this additional?
Do you mean what was reported to the board?
Yeah, I'm on the third bullet point.
Right.
Yeah, where it says bullying and so forth.
Right.
Self-harm and so forth, drugs, alcohol. So I'm asking if you're calling that out. What I'm wondering is, do we have the same metrics that we have today? Are you going to add some more for that?
So I understand the question.
Yeah.
So in the past, my department dealt with the students that were hospitalized, Rockford Public School students that were hospitalized, whether they were special education or general education.
Right.
Last year and the year before, we saw a tremendous increase in students needing hospitalization, and that could be anything from drug and alcohol abuse to self-harm. And so, yes, I do believe that that's an area where our students are, they're struggling.
So I guess my question was around the metrics. So will we increase how we track that, or do you feel that we're already tracking that?
I feel like we're tracking that right now. What I don't feel like we're doing is any preventative, so that people can maybe identify some issues that students are struggling with ahead of maybe a bit more proactively. So what are the red flags and warning signs if a student is depressed and suicidal?
Right, right. So really more emphasis on preventative is kind of what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. For the professional development, yes.
Yeah, you're right. I'm talking about, right. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Yes, Ms. Pearson.
I have one last quick question. So the student code of conduct, it being composed, does it reflect, and I'll do some homework too, so does it reflect the state student code of conduct in terms of our?
I'll call in a friend. What I do know are the state statutes that what is required to be in the student code of conduct. So tobacco, you cannot change the tobacco policy as a Board of Ed.
Right.
No tobacco on school grounds. There has to be a bullying policy statement. So there's some things that are in this, the Illinois statute that are required. Outside of how it's constructed is up to the student advisory team and for review.
I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Simmons.
I just was going to clarify and add that, yes, all of the statutorily mandated requirements of the Illinois School Code are captured in the Student Code of Conduct. And then as with regard to like police notifications, certain provisions that are mandated under the law are captured there in the Code of Conduct. Example being staff battery. So yes, it does reflect the mandates of the Illinois School Code.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Connor.
Sorry. No, I was going to ask if there were any more questions.
Could I just ask, with regard to your parent groups that zoomed in, what kind of participation did we have?
It was very minimal this year.
Like, what's very minimal?
I have it right here. We had, that's the number, 2, 3, 4, 7 parents attend during.
All six meetings?
In all of the meetings, correct.
Oh. And then my second one is you gave us a slide on a timeline, and the piece on there that I didn't see was that was the presentation to the students. I mean, it was part of the presentation that it has to be within 15 days, but just maybe a little bit of information on how that is done, in the English classes. What are we doing at what grade levels, if you wouldn't mind?
Absolutely. So at the secondary level, we call them the student discipline talks. And we enter into the high school, we entered into every English classroom on the very first week of school. And we went over some of the major things that will get you in very big trouble if you do these things or bring these things to school. So we do a pretty broad, but not very deep. We cover the policies that would result in expulsion and suspensions. And then we allow the students to ask questions. Dr. Vosberg, I don't know if you know what happens at elementary. I'm not familiar with that. They do the same.
There's a presentation to all the students in elementary, classroom, and then middle school, I believe.
Your mic's not on. No. There you go.
How about that? Okay.
Yep.
Elementary's by classroom level, and then middle school, I think they do it in every math class.
And when you say we, who comes in to that?
It's the principals and the assistant principals.
Okay. So students start getting used to this code, you know, in elementary, and they hear it year after year after year. And I'm hoping that we highlight changes. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was part of our timeline, because that's an important piece that the students are. And then the parents only receive a copy. At this point in time, there is no meetings with parents.
Correct. At this point, there are no meetings for parents.
Mr. Connor, let me give you the floor back to finish your report.
Okay. Yep. Assuming no more questions or comments from anyone. Okay, this will come back for a vote at the May 11th board meeting. Our next item is a resolution transferring interest earned and a transfer of interest income to the Capital Projects Fund in the amount of $926,778 is required to fund the remainder of furniture plan commitment. Are there any questions on this? Anything need to be said? We're all good? Okay, the next, and that will come back May 11th board meeting. The next is a property transfer from Winnebago County to RPS 205. As part of the facilities master plan, the district will be replacing and enlarging the parking lot at the STEAM Academy at Haskell this summer, acquiring the vacant property directly north of the Haskell parking lot will provide the district an opportunity to improve drainage and property appearance near the school. Winnebago County has agreed to transfer the vacant lot to RPS 205 for $10. Thank you, County. And this parcel of land is approximately 0.9 acres. Any comments or anything? Okay. This item will come back to at the May 11th board meeting. And the next is system-wide framework. And the first of a series of 3 updates this month, Mrs. Detman, Executive Director of Academics, will share with the board the draft standards of practice for elementary schools, report on the progress of the team, and summarize the feedback from key stakeholders.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering if Connor has the slides available to pull up. And while we're waiting, you have 2 attachments in board docs. One is a copy of the presentation, and the other is a paper document that you also have in front of you. It is a copy of the draft standards of practice with a page for notes as well. Does he have everything he needs, Dr. Jarrett? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Connor, could you make it slightly bigger so it fits the screen? Thank you. Okay, the microphone is magic. It's a speaker right back to Connor. So tonight we are going to spend our time really digging deep into the standards of practice And this will be the first in a series of 3, as Mr. Connor shared this month. And as board members, you can expect regular and ongoing and frequent communication and partnership on the standards and the entire system-wide framework over the next 2 months at a minimum. Dr. Jarrett shared with you multiple questions that we need to grapple with as a team. Some of them are specifically for the board to respond to, and some are questions that we need to grapple with kind of as a leadership team of administration and cabinet. I'm sorry, administration and board. But you can see that tonight we're really focused on 3A, it's highlighted in purple, and A and B underneath. We will not answer this question tonight, but tonight's presentation prepares you to be able to then answer that specific question. Next time we come together, we'll be focused on the scoring mechanism in the standards and the concept of tracks for school improvement. So we're going to start with the draft tonight, ask how are we going to score this next time, and then finally on May 25th, we'll pull all of this together and how it aligns with our focus areas, the district-wide goals as outlined in the superintendent's contract, and the system-wide framework as a whole. I'm going to begin tonight again by reminding us our 2 commitments. The first is that we are committed to raising student achievement. The second is that we are committed to advancing our equity imperative. You've already seen our equity imperative once tonight, and you'll see it again now. Our responsibility is to create learning environments that work for all of our students and interrupt the predictability of student outcomes based on zip code. Specifically, our data tells us that currently our system is not serving our African American students well, and they are furthest from success. We began our journey with this, the scorecard concept with this visual. And this reflects our current reality, which is in multiple neighborhoods across our community. We have red schools, we have yellow schools, we have green schools, we have blue schools. Our vision of success is that no matter where you live, you have the opportunity for your child to attend a green or a blue school. And so that's really the impetus for our system-wide framework for improvement. I'm going to orient us with just a few slides before we jump into the draft standards so that we can kind of keep reiterating these visuals and the context of our greater work together. First is our kind of mental model of overlapping circles. Thank you, Connor. These are the major components of our system-wide framework. At the top is quality, currently defined by the quality peer review and the least developed of the system. Continuous improvement is our school scorecard. Those are our metrics for student achievement as defined by high quality instruction and also climate and culture. The circle we're going to spend a lot of time together on this month is the purple, standards. But ultimately what we're after is in the middle, accountability. What happens if we have schools that continually are in a downward trajectory or do not grow students? To kind of conceptualize how this looks, essentially what we're proposing is before schools get to, and I'm actually going to advance one slide and then go back, before schools get to a 3, 4, or 5-year track for improvement, we need to define those tracks. Our scoring proposal as it stands at the moment, there's asterisks all over. Those asterisks say all weighting is subject to board approval based upon recommendation from the administration. What exists currently is under the yellow. Right now, we do have a school scorecard that is weighted 75% quality instruction, 25% climate and culture. A new half of our scoring system is what we're developing and what you'll preview tonight, which is the standard system. This weighting has not been developed yet. We'll focus on scoring next time. But these 2 halves, the standards and the scorecard, is what would define a 3-year, a 4-year, or a 5-year track for improvement. And as a reminder, 3-year schools are those that are less stable. 5-year schools are those that are more stable. But we need a point of reference to really understand what we're after in our work in the standards of practice and the standards of service. So we're going to focus tonight on the standards of practice. And we're going to use an example from the medical field. As a patient, when you go in for a surgical procedure, the team in the room does what's called a surgical timeout. A surgical timeout is not just an idea that a random person cooked up and said, every person in our surgery ward will be a part of a surgical timeout. Rather, it's based on a body of research that says when the surgical team pauses before beginning the procedure, they mitigate the risk of adverse medical events as a result of the procedure. So it is a universally accepted way to decrease adverse medical events. Further, as a patient, you don't even need to know about this timeout. You don't need to ask for it. You don't need to make sure that someone has written down for you that the team promises to give you a timeout. Further, no matter what doctor or health system is caring for you, you can expect it. And everyone in that room knows their role and does their part to contribute to the agreed upon standard. So we asked ourselves, what would that look like in education? How can we take that concept and apply it to education? What are our standards of care for our students? In January 2021, the Wallace Foundation published a white paper, which is a meta-study on the last 20 years of research in effective principles whose work yielded stronger equitable outcomes for students. And what they found was there are really 3 core skills for principals. And they named them people, instruction, and organization. And that when leaders are strong in these 3 areas, and they exhibit the leadership behaviors listed here, the output is equitable school and student outcomes. We are currently building the capacity of our school leaders in leading for equity. We asked ourselves, okay, so let's bring that into our local context. How would we define those buckets here? And that gave us our organizing concept for the standards of practice. We're defining them as relationships, instruction, and strategic decisions. And here are our commitments, our standards of care. We listen to our students, families, and staff, and believe their input is critical to our improvement. We prioritize active learning, safety, and relationships to help students grow. We use data to help us connect students to equitable opportunities, experiences, and success. So if you take the concept of the timeout and you replace timeout with instruction, we ask ourselves the same question. Is this a universally accepted way to increase student achievement and advance the equity imperative? 20 years worth of research around effective principles says yes. Should students and families have to ask to receive this service? No. I should not have to be an expert in early literacy to know whether or not my child is being provided with strong foundational literacy instruction. Should students and families at different RPS 205 schools be receiving different access? No. And can everyone contribute to the success of this standard? We believe yes. But we have some critical questions to ask about this. The one we're going to linger on tonight is, how do we measure this? How do we measure these standards of practice? And Ms. Lawrence did a great job of setting up our next question, which is, how can we help? How are we going to align the roles of some of these critical student-facing positions to all align and push us towards our goals in raising student achievement and advancing our equity imperative? So what you have in front of you is our draft to date. I'm going to walk you through first this current draft, and then I'm going to share with you the story of how it came to be. So you have a printed copy of this in front of you so that you can see it much better and make notes along the way. What I'll do is walk you through the content. And again, our goal tonight is not to ask, hey, are these the right things and can you commit tonight? Our goal tonight is to walk you through where these came from, why they exist, so that as we tackle those larger questions in the next several weeks together, you have the information at your at the ready to be able to do that work. So you can see repeats of those 3 statements. In orange, we prioritize active learning, safety, and relationships to help all students grow. In blue, we listen to our students, families, and staff and believe their input is critical to our improvement. And in pink, we use data to help us connect students to equitable opportunities, experiences, and success. But our question was, how do we measure that? There are two different ways to look at these. The first is the practice. The practice defines what we're doing, and the metric measures how we're doing it. This is our elementary standards of practice. We decided to zoom in only on elementary to walk through this prototype. There is a separate one page for early childhood, middle school, and high school. Many of the practices overlap. Some are unique to that particular level. You'll have the full body of drafts available this week for you. Practice 1, students learn to read systematically through direct, explicit instruction. That's what the science reading says that students need. How are we going to measure that? You're familiar already with our Tier 3 academic return on investment study that provides that definition. This language is the same. Practice 2, students learn to express themselves in writing, both in response to reading and to develop their skills as a writer. We have a curriculum called the Units of Study that offers students multiple times throughout the year to practice their writing skills. In this metric, there is a random audit of student files to ensure that they are having exposure to and access to that curriculum. Practice 3, students build number sense to develop a fluid and flexible use of numbers and operations. In this particular practice, we need to go see, we need to observe, we need to see number talks happening in classrooms. Practice 4, schools establish time, space, and structure within an action plan to deliver a multi-tiered system of support that's academic and social emotional to all students. In practices 5, 6, and 7, these are all ways that schools listen to kids, they listen to their parents, and they listen to staff, and demonstrate through a series of actions that feedback has a direct line to their plans for improvement. And then practice 8. Data disaggregated by student groups drives school improvement efforts, which prioritize students who are furthest from success. And here's where the concept of targeted universalism comes in. Targeted universalism is a means to equity. It's an approach to thinking about how we set goals, how we identify strategies based on what we know about our students. Now, disaggregated data comes in a quantitative form, but it also connects back to our listening commitment. It also comes in a qualitative form. What are our children saying that they need? What are their parents saying that they need? So this is where we are right now, but it has been a long journey. And for just a moment, I'm going to walk you through that so you can understand what it took to get to the one page in front of you. We've been involved in a protocol of prototyping and testing iteratively, sometimes every couple of days, sometimes every couple of weeks, and sometimes every couple of hours, depending on who we're talking to. Why do we prototype? Great question. We prototype for 4 reasons. First, we want to make sure that we uncover any assumptions that we have, any biases that we have, and hidden issues. We prototype to align our team. We prototype to mitigate for premature attachment. What does that mean? It means I can't fall in love with my own ideas and think they're the right thing. We have to approach it each time as a fresh prototype, open and ready for feedback. And ultimately to save time and money. It would be foolish to launch a standards of practice system that didn't have voice included from multiple stakeholders. So I'm going to walk you through where we started. We met ourselves where we were, which is a department by department look. The question here on this Google form, I just grabbed a snip of our Google sheet, was what departments do you think need to create standards of practice for schools? And our central office rally cry team completed this exercise. What's highlighted in purple is where we had kind of the most agreement, and that's where we started. We also asked our principals to do the same thing, to see if what they saw and what we saw were two different areas of priorities. So we asked them to kind of, put their X's in the cells and identify the departments. We also asked them to follow up if they'd like to provide a rationale for any department that they selected. From there, we created a template and said, okay, for each department that was selected, develop your standards of practice. What are they? Tell us about them. Where do they come from? And here's a sample from EdTech. What we heard, though, from our rally cry team is these are nice, but they're still really siloed, and we're not seeing the big picture. We said, okay, let's try and build that together. So down the left-hand column of this, you'll see the standards as they existed at that time. Most of those have changed. And across the top, you'll see this is where we started applying that research from the Wallace Foundation, and we started asking, to bucket things into instruction, relationships, or strategic decision-making. That helped, but it still wasn't clear. So that led to our next draft. Our next draft was pulling all of those together into one card by level. This is the elementary. And you can see I started with a little kind of color coding. We had early drafts of those major commitment statements, more early drafts of the standards. But down the right-hand side, you can see people weighing in. What did they have to say about this? Where were we clear, unclear? What did you like, not like? How can we make this better? We took that over to the principals as well. We had, at that time, had our second focus group with our principals, our third focus group, actually, with our principals. And we asked them to take a look at the draft as well, and our rally cry team again. And here's what we heard. Our rally cry team basically said, we're getting narrower, okay, but what's our common how? We're still lacking some cohesion, and we need to make sure that they stay student focused. Our principals were saying, we hear your need for cohesion, but we need to tell you that we need unique supports for the kids in our school that we know and understand, and we need a chance to tell our story to the central office. We also need you to double down on your customer service because we're going to need you. Where we overlapped was a need for clarity and not feeling disconnected. So we went back again. And this one has a Dear Reader note at the top. I just snipped it exactly as it was. Here are some of the changes that we heard you. Here are some of the changes that we've made in this next prototype. So let's keep the conversation going. And here's what we've heard. Here we had our third focus group with principals. We felt like we didn't hear all that they had to say yet, though, so we invited them to join our rally cry team. Brooke Peterson followed up in small groups, and if she didn't hear from a principal in a small group, she called them. She was relentless in ensuring that we got every voice at the table and we listened to their feedback. As I've shared throughout this process, we turn that feedback into data points. Those data points create themes. The themes create key insights. And here's what we've heard. There must be a way to ensure that all of our work is connected at all levels across the district, perhaps starting with goals. Yes. We need a strong understanding of how our survey tools can help our schools and district learn and grow. Once standards are completed, we need to review all programs that the district offers and determine how all students fit into the system and have the support that they need. There's a footnote on the prototype that you're looking at that says we're going to have to differentiate some of these based on, the different schools that we have. And we know that we're kind of finalizing our base model here before we begin differentiating. And I can't read that one, so I'll look this way. Serious consideration is needed around setting standards that are not only appropriate for what the district believes should be provided to all students, but also ensuring that we are listening to the system to make sure that we provide the tools to make sure that deeper work can also be completed and make positive change. And finally, SEL is necessary to represent the standards since it is such a large-scale obstacle in our district. We also asked our teachers to weigh in, but we asked our teachers to weigh in before they even saw a draft of the standards. We asked them 4 questions, and those are listed above, which you can read. But the third one is really the most important for this particular presentation. We asked them, when we say that we want buildings to be relentless about offering certain things that are best for students, what does this look like or mean to you? In other words, what do you hope to see on the standards? And so that yielded several key insights. And I'm going to read them aloud to make sure that we give them space here for their words as well. Each classroom may have unique challenges built in that need to be addressed in unique ways. Strong building leaders can effectively promote building health and well-being and bring a sense of assurance in stressful times. Consistency and time is necessary to determine if our initiatives are working before we shift to the next solution causing chaos. SEL is a profound area of need in our system that needs to be addressed and can't be left out of the future focus. We need to keep in mind and constantly acknowledge that measuring progress is absolutely necessary for success. There is also a component to the work that is just as necessary for success, that is easier to observe and not as easy to measure. What that means is we had a few stories in our focus group about how beautiful their school is. They host multiple special programs, and they've got kindergartners learning sign language to be able to communicate with the students in the deaf and hard of hearing program. There are Arabic students and English-speaking students in the same school, and that the community that they've built, where children are learning to be with each other, it can't be measured, but it's something that they're most proud of. And then finally, the size and complexity of our district is felt by employees throughout and leaves many unsure where and how they fit in and if they can or should help and effectively contribute to our work. One piece of paper is not going to solve all those problems. But if we go back to our system-wide framework, we can situate, we're getting there. Connor, would you mind scooting that down just a little bit for me? Oh, up, sorry. Thank you. If we go back to our overall goals of the system-wide framework, we can see how the multiple systems together can be mutually supportive to help us get at some of those larger concepts. Our standards work is clarifying our focus. What are we going to be relentless in providing to students and families? And then in standards of service, what will the central office be relentless about in providing to schools so they can get that work done? So I hope tonight you've been able to see a little bit more about what we mean when we say standards of practice, what these items are starting to look like, how we're engaging multiple voices in the process, so that we can get clear on our standards portion to ensure we build the rest of the framework to support it. Our next question for our focus groups is, how can we support you? What matters the most? What are the standards of service that you expect and you need from the central office? And I'll take any questions that you have.
Anyone? Yeah.
Hi, Heidi. I have a question in regard to page.
You need to get closer to your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's much better. Okay, so I have a question in regard to page 21.
Okay.
So I believe you said that this is input from the rally cry team.
I'm sorry, I can't quite see. 18, 19, 20.
It has a list of the department names?
Yes.
Okay, so at the top of, I guess, that chart, or at the top of the columns, there's the abbreviations. What do those stand for?
Those are our initials.
Gotcha.
So each individual on the rally cry team, I'm
Okay.
HD.
Okay, and then I have one more question.
Sure.
On the previous page, page 20,
Yes.
when it breaks down the prototyping and testing,
Yes.
the first question is, why do we prototype? And that's pretty self-explanatory. But do we dig into how we prototype? Like, for example, the first bullet point says to uncover assumptions, biases, and hidden issues early. Do we know how we're going to actually jump into that?
Well, that's kind of the work that we're doing right now, is ensuring that every time we're in front of a focus group or we're gathering input from our rally cry team, we have a very solid way to capture their voices and develop our key insights from there. So it's about making meaning from what we're hearing rather than coming in with the answer ourselves as conveners of the group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess what I was leading to was with the bias, that's something that runs very deeply. So are there going to be any trainings to help people with unpacking that or truly addressing that? That's where I'm leading to.
Okay, thank you. So I would say that connects more directly to our equity work. and our Leading for Equity Institute that we generally have on an annual basis. Mr. Zed, oh, he's not here. Annual basis, which is really more about introspection and making each individual participant aware of their implicit bias. That's a part of a training that we offer across the district. I believe we've had about 600 people trained in that particular experience. It's called Leading for Equity, and our equity design team has created that.
Is this mandatory training or voluntary?
It is not mandatory, it is voluntary at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and we have our equity systems team would be kind of the team that would kind of make movement on that particular piece.
Any other question? Mr. Rounds?
If we can go to slide 12. I know there's a lot of asterisks here, but
Yes.
I think we should just have a conversation about it. So
Yep.
the scoring rubric proposal. So the 75% quality instruction, that I assume, but I need you to confirm it, that's the actual like outcomes on the IAR?
Those are the indicators that we've already committed to on our local scorecard. So there's MAP, there's IAR, PSAT, SAT,
Right.
et cetera.
So those are the actual outcomes.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, we have growth and proficiency on our scorecard. So we have measures for outcomes and measures for growth.
So, you know, this is a comment that I've made before. I'll probably just keep making the comment. So even despite these asterisks, so we're talking about a scoring proposal that scores outcomes 75% of 50%, which is 37.5%. And if we actually look at the outcomes that our people look at, which are the IAR, the SAT, and the PSAT, it's going to be less than that because we have growth in there as well. So I'm not really clear on how we intend to use this school report card. So I would say what we used to talk about was lagging indicators and leading indicators. And the half on the left are the lagging indicators. And we all understand and acknowledge that you can't move the lagging indicators without doing something about the leading indicators. And you're telling us, the administration is telling us, these standards of practice are the leading indicators that you need to focus on in order to move the lagging indicators. But when I see an arithmetic formula like this, I can easily come up with a scenario where the school's lagging indicators continue to get worse, but they do pretty well on this scoring rubric proposal. And that we tell ourselves in the community, oh, this is a really good school. And the community is looking at those numbers, which is all they look at, whether that's fair or not, that's what they're looking at, and they're seeing those numbers continue to go down. So, you know, from my standpoint, I'm just going to tell you what my thought process. I am always going to hold the administration accountable as a board member for the outcomes. It is up to you to decide how you want to move those outcomes. But what I don't want to see happen is for the board to buy into this school report card, and then if that does happen, that it turns out we've got the wrong leading indicators or whatever, that we somehow tell ourselves or the community that we're doing really well. They're going to be looking at like 4 numbers if you include high school graduation rate.
Yes. And I guess, you know, what I would tell you is we cannot move those lags without strong systems of interventions and supports in our schools.
I agree.
We simply
and what
can't.
I'm telling you is that's your job.
Yes.
It's your job as the administration to decide what you think you need to do in order to move those numbers.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, if you decide wrong, I still think I get to hold you accountable for not moving the numbers.
That's right. And actually, it's me that you hold accountable. So we have contractual goals to improve the graduation rate, the freshman on track rate, the IAR reading, and the building, and then a 5% increase on the on-track rate for middle school. And so those are the 4 contractual things that I am accountable for by 2024. And so what this system is our attempt to drive that support and accountability to the school level so that we all know our role. My role is, in my evaluation is going to be very heavily skewed towards, those lagging indicators at the end of 3 years, no doubt about it. Whereas a brand new principal taking over a lower performing school, if we want to recruit someone who's a really talented principal to take on a tough turnaround challenge, if we said in year one, you have to compete on the lags with a school that's well established and has much higher test scores, we would continually have a difficult time doing that. So I think ultimately this conversation is going to be about how do we distribute the appropriate amount of accountability throughout, so everyone in the system knows their role. But your point is well taken, specifically by me, who's really the one the board holds accountable, that I know where I'm accountable, and that is going to be some combination of delivering on whatever CEO-centric targets we agree on, living the values, but ultimately you're going to say by 2024, did you get where you said you were going to get?
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. McCulloch. We are at 0 for our time. I'm happy for this to go forward, but I don't want us to take away from another committee without asking if we can go over, if that's the pleasure of the board.
So unless I hear any objection from the rest of the board, because Mr. Siegel did such a great job of finishing a little bit early, if he doesn't mind, we'll take some of that time and continue on. Please.
Okay, so another 15 minutes or so? Okay, if that's acceptable to everybody. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to point out that our time was up. So, Mr. Rollins,
I thought I was going to get saved by the bell, Mr. Connor.
No.
No, I was done.
No such luck.
I was done.
Okay, all right. And then Mrs. McCulloch, you had your light on. Did you want to say something?
No, just
Oh, okay.
have it on.
Just generically. Ms. Pearson, yep.
Thank you. So, I'm looking at the presentation, and again, there's homework for me to do. However, I can't help but to think about some of the core issues that has a lot to do with discipline. So I think we need to look at the demographics of the students that are at risk and how we're going to keep them in the mainstream general education population. And I just don't, it's difficult for me to understand how that's going to happen when we have very rigid consequences in the area of disciplinary. And I understand that, there's state statutes, and I'm sure that there's, a lot of information that I may need to obtain. But until we really deal with some of our core issues, I don't foresee outcomes changing. Because students have to be present, and there's so many contributing factors in our children's education. We can't put all the burden on RPS 205. I've said from the beginning of time, as a community member and as a board member, that there has to be parental and community engagement in addition to the efforts of RPS 205. And some may say that the greater burden is on RPS 205. So I think overall we need to really look at what we're really willing to do to assure that the equity is viable, that it is literally happening, in order for us to see the overall outcome that we desire, if that makes sense.
It does. I hear you.
Anything else? Anyone? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Detman. This
Thank
will,
you so much.
at the May 11th board meeting, Mrs. Detman will return and report progress. the scoring system for the standards. And the last thing is we have a preview of consent items, and there are actually quite a few, so I will just run through these very quickly. For the May 11th meeting, we'll have the standards we normally have: payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction pay request log, third quarter treasurer's report, report on the 2022 student fees, 1 year extensions for the 3 charter schools, Galapagos, Legacy, and Jackson. And then we will have the IGA with Rockford Police will come up. Bids for the Haskell School parking lot replacements, milk and dairy products, refrigeration service, kitchen equipment, Sterling Holly parking lot ceiling and striping, Tier 1 K-12 insight making feedback matter workshops, and I recognize those as all English words, but I don't really know how they fit together. Yeah, that was just to see if everybody was awake on, terminology. Education, engineering, and IT, man, they all have their terms. And Tier 1 RPS 205 mobile app. And then the consent items for May the 25th would be, again, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction pay, request log, RPS managed work change orders, the IFB 2025 printing of the student code of conduct, and RFP 2129 workers' compensation. So that is the list, and I don't know if there's any questions. Mr. Rollins.
I was just curious on the 1 year extension for the charters. Is that just because we basically don't have any data for this year, so we might as well just roll them over for an extra year?
Yes, it wasn't a random choice. Basically, that is the way the state dictated things in terms of, because there is a dearth of standardized testing data and anything that we built into our contract. That's essentially why we're essentially delaying the decision for 1 year so that they can accumulate some baseline data.
Makes sense.
Anything else? Okay, that is performance monitoring. Yay, we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. You kind of trialed.
I'm sorry, Ms. Pearson, did you have?
I have a question, and forgive me if it's off base, but I just need some clarity on charter schools, period. Is this appropriate time for the answer question?
I mean, we'll have an extended discussion, but I'm good with it, so.
So sure. How are the charter schools accountable to RPS 205?
Dr. Jarrett, do you want me to start?
Actually, Ms. Heidi, Ms. Detman is stepping up.
Yeah, but I could give you a quick high-level overview.
Sure, because this is something that we should really cover in onboarding and not part of this committee.
Yeah, so I'll go real high level to just give you a kind of a overview, and then we can dive much deeper during onboarding. What ends up happening with charter schools is the definition is built into the term. So the charter school has a charter that they agree to that is a commitment to what they will deliver. And that charter essentially is a contract that the district and the school come to an agreement on. And the charter has to successfully achieve the terms of its contract to be renewed. And so what we are talking about here with our 3 partners is extending their agreement by a year because they really didn't have some of the key student achievement metrics that we would use to hold them accountable because there were really no viable testing results last spring.
Okay, thank you for making the time to give me that overview. I appreciate it.
Perfect, good. Thank you again, Mr. Connor. Talk about, I was going to say trial by fire, first time in with the 1 week. And you forgot medical lingo when you talked about engineering and IT.
Yeah, medical, yeah, they're kind of in there, same group,
All right,
yeah.
I appreciate that. Mr. Rounds, it's your opportunity to bring forward the Planning and Development Committee's.
Thank you. I'm going to take things a little out of order because I'm going to do item B first just because it's simple and we might as well get it out of the way. So when we approved the 2020 tax levy back in November of 2020, we did that presentation immediately after we did a presentation on our upcoming facilities needs based on the facilities needs assessment, which was a little bit scary. And as a result of that discussion, we did agree when we did the levy to take new property, to include new property in the levy, which generated an extra $790,000. And there was discussion at the time about just designating that internally to make sure, since that's the reason we're doing it, that that actually gets used on capital projects within the district. And so the district is bringing forth this resolution, which we'll vote on at the next board meeting to do that, to designate that, to limit the use of that money internally for capital projects, upcoming capital projects. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, let's go to ESSER 2. And one of the results of the pandemic is I'm losing all of these acronyms. The federal government is coming up with acronyms faster than I can process them. So apparently ESSER stands for, it's here somewhere, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And what this boils down to is we're going to get a lot of money from the federal government, and Ms. Yar is here to tell us how we plan to spend that.
All right, good evening. Yes, I'm going to go over our preliminary spends for the ESSER dollars. Just so everyone is aware, this can change, or well, definitely will change. As we identify different needs, we have an opportunity to do a grant amendment. So with that understanding, I'll go ahead and get started. So I thought I would take this opportunity to talk about both ESSERs. It gets confusing. So we have ESSER 2, which is $64 million. That application is due June 30th. So we're getting ready to submit that application, which is why we're bringing this forward right now. ARP ESSER, it was termed ESSER 3 initially, but now it's ARP ESSER. It's under the American Rescue Plan. So we will start calling it ARP ESSER. So $144 million there. That grant application is not available yet. We do know that this requirements are very much the same. But that application is not released until July 1st. So this is an estimate of the $144 million. So what can we use this dollars for? We can address learning loss, prepare schools for reopening and testing. We can repair and upgrade our facilities to improve air quality in our school buildings. So I'm going to focus on ESSER 2 right now. So that's the $64 million. Again, focuses on schools reopening safely. So it makes sense because we want schools to reopen. We want our buildings to be safe for kids. Also learning loss. And we can also go back and recoup costs that we actually had that we haven't been able to claim under the other, either CARES Act or the FEMA. So we have both of those other funding available. So if I couldn't claim it under those two, we're looking at all of our expenses in one bucket basically and seeing what fits where so we can do the best with our money. So we're going to go back and claim those as well. So the learning loss, I just did a summary for this. So the learning loss is 1.6 that we have in there right now. There's a lot of planning that's involved with that. Remote learning and safety, I put those together at 2.2 million. School student support at 1.6. And then I asked Mr. Phillips to look at our facilities condition assessment and look at what would help with air quality and what needs do we have. So it was really nice that we had that done so we could go back and look at that from our outside vendor. So you can see that this is 69 million. So we can move this over to ARP ESSER. Like I said, when I started, as we identify other things that we really need to do to help students, we'll just shift that over because there's no way that we can get $64 million done in 1 or 2 years. So we'll just keep shifting as we go along with this as needed. So we did have the learning loss identified. Now, Mrs. Detman did talk about this at the last board meeting. She talked about district management group, STAR 360. So that's the majority of what you see here. We do have universal screener and then additional tutor hours. We do have additional funding that we're using to address the learning loss in the summer programs, which I'm going to toss that over to Mrs. Detman after we get a little further in this presentation. These are some of the expenses that we have. We have the IT help desk. We did add 2 FTEs so we can to support remote learning. I mean, think about all the computers going out and all of the students being online. We needed additional support there. So that is allowable to be claimed. We can also use these dollars to build in a refresh cycle. So our Chromebook and iPads, we will go ahead and claim that in the application. So right now we're getting ready to submit the application. Doesn't mean it's going to be approved as we submit, but these are our ideas of how this fits under the requirements, and then ISB will grant, you know, us an approved budget or ask us to revise as we go through this. We do have some licenses and some air purifiers for schools with rooms that do not have windows. It's very small at $21,000 there. This is our big ask for these dollars. So here's our $64 million. HVAC makes sense with ventilation, heating and AC, and cooling. We did communicate this in the superintendent's update as well. And then you can see the other items, doors, roofing, and then we build in contingencies here. So the next round that we anticipate getting $144 million, and that we need to reserve 20% of those funds to address learning loss. The rest of it, same requirements as the ESSER $2. So the funds are fairly flexible in that manner, so we will reserve that. So Mrs. Detman is working on the 20% right now, planning that out. And then Mr. Phillips is working on the rest of it to looking at our facilities as well. So with that, are there any questions about grants? I'll have Mrs. Detman talk about the non-ESSER grant fundings because this is important for talking about summer programming and learning loss, or Mr. Phillips for facilities.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So on page 8, the facilities portion of the ESSER dollars,
yes.
Where it's broken down in the HVAC categories, like the cooling and heating, does that include just estimates for some schools to get air conditioning that don't have it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Phillips.
Good evening. So yes, this is kind of a breakdown, a look at our district. We have various degrees of air conditioning throughout the district. Right now we have 8 schools that are fully air conditioned. The remaining could be anywhere from 7% of occupied square footage up to 85%. So really our main focus with this first go around is to air condition 100% of our classrooms across the district. Now, doing that, we will, if it's say a unit ventilator in a classroom, which brings in outdoor air and heats and cools, we will be addressing some of our facilities condition assessment issues by replacing old equipment that's past its lifestyle with new equipment. Through that process, we're also able to upgrade filtering. Right, if you looked at CDC recommendations and ASHRAE recommendations, they recommend a MERV 13 filter at a minimum. Because of the age of our facilities and equipment, we haven't been able to do that. Right now we're at about a 10. So this gives us an opportunity to improve those conditions also.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, a couple things. There may be some question because we did have a facilities plan. So what benefit did we get from the facilities plan that will help this, but where are the deficits that are still there that requires so much money to address? And to be clear, a big part of these funds from the feds was to address, air quality and those kinds of things, because that was seen as directly related to pandemic issues. So again, 2 things. One is, what did we get done and what didn't we get done that requires this level of
So Mr. Connor, in a number of our elementary schools during the facilities master plan, we did do unit ventilator upgrades in the classrooms that provided a heating coil and a cooling coil. What's not there in those elementary schools is the actual cooling infrastructure to feed the cold water through the coil. So that's what we would be doing in the schools that already had unit ventilator upgrades. In the other schools like Lincoln, East, West, where there were no unit ventilator upgrades, we would be adding those. Part of this summer, we're doing a phase 1 at West where we're actually replacing existing unit ventilators and with new that will include a cooling coil. So we'll be positioned to utilize these ESSER 2 funds next summer to do the actual air conditioning infrastructure at the school.
And I would assume that because the schools you just mentioned, and I assume also Roosevelt, are some of the oldest schools, and they have the old style heating, and those, I assume, all have to go, for us to do anything really with, frankly, both heating, but especially air conditioning.
Correct, that's correct.
Yeah.
So another piece to that will be brought forward this month also. We advertise for our request for qualifications. During our facilities master plan, we did the same thing for architectural services. So we have a wide variety of architects, but very limited number of engineering services. So we will be bringing forward 2 firms that we would recommend to assist us or partner with us in the design of these projects going forward. One being IMEG, the other being Keith Engineering. Both those firms have included a local architect because there's still architectural work that will go along with this, with walls and ceilings, to assist us as we look to design these projects going forward. This is a very tight timeline from a facilities perspective. These funds, the $64 million needs to be spent by September 30th of 2023. The ARP ESSER dollars just follow a year later, September 30th of 2024. So it is important for us to get our engineering team on board to start designing this summer. So next summer we are ready to go, and you'll start seeing projects coming forward.
And if I could comment very quickly on this, for the newer board members, there's 2 important concepts buried in what Mr. Phillips just said. One is that we actually don't have the expertise, and actually locally there is a lack of expertise on certain items that if we did not have that, it would add considerably both to the time frame and probably the quality. So that's one thing that, if you're wondering why we're using some, out that are not local, that's one of the reasons, is that there's a level of expertise. But the second thing is that there has been a commitment by RPS 205 to support local businesses. And so what Mr. Phillips said is very important, that even though we have some folks that are not from the area, number one, they might have local offices here, and number 2 is that they are open for talks about qualified people that could help, so that we keep faithful to try to support local business. And just so you know, when we did the last plan, most of construction is fairly self-evident and really locally serviced, if you will. When it comes to some of the harder to fill services, some of the advanced architecture and engineering, the fact is that we have done a pretty good job, and originally there was a number of architecture firms in particular that had complained about having local firms a part of it. So kudos to Mr. Phillips and the organization for committing to engage those very groups to make sure that we are also helping local business, across the board. So I wanted to point that out, because, these are big federal dollars, and, you might hear from your constituents, how are we going to spend that? And so I think it's fairly important. Mr. Phillips, I don't know if I've given all the right details on that, but.
Mr. Rollins,
Were there any other questions?
can I ask, I have a question,
Mrs. McCall?
if I may. On slide 3, it says recoup costs incurred in 2020, 2021, not available, be claimed previously. You just talked about West and the work that we've been doing with the HVAC there. Would that be an item that we would be able
Yes,
to
we
use?
are. Yeah, we have that going on the application for ESSER 2.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay, so any of those. How about all that money on furniture that just came through tonight, is any of that?
No furniture.
Okay.
It's COVID related, so it's pandemic
Well, I
related.
didn't know if any of that might be COVID related because of spacing
Not for these
and
furniture,
things.
but if there's additional furniture for, spacing, to increase the spacing, then yes, that would be, we think that would be eligible, and we would definitely build that in.
And we don't have to spend so much on any HVAC that it would be cheaper just to buy a new building, do we?
Mr. Phillips?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but.
Not at this point, no.
So I was going to say, Mr. Phillips, in addition to the elementary schools, we had that specific discussion about Guilford and Auburn. We upgraded the univents as part of the facilities plan, and they're ready to be air conditioned, but they just aren't air conditioned. And I actually thought, my recollection is that all 3 of the new field houses we built are ready to be air conditioned. They're just not air conditioned. Is that correct?
I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay.
That would be our next phase. One, to make sure all of our classrooms are air conditioned, and then move out to our bigger spaces. So that's definitely going to be an important process that we work through with our engineers to really get a scope of work and an estimated budget early on to see how much can we actually accomplish with the dollars that we'll be getting. Our hope would be to get fully air conditioned throughout the district. I'm not quite sure we can get there with the money, but we will do, I want to make sure we're doing things efficiently and hitting economies of scale so we can get the most done that we can.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to be working against, I'm already hearing the construction costs are skyrocketing, and if they dump a lot of money on us that has to be spent in a very short period of time, there's a limited number of contractors, and that's just going to increase costs as well.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. The last thing I've got is a consent item.
I think we want to finish with the non-ESSER. That's okay?
Sorry.
That's all
Mrs.
right.
Detman.
Yeah, Mrs. Detman's going to cover that.
Is that on the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there it is. All right, sorry.
And I just want to, shout out to Mr. Phillips for MERV 13. I've never heard of that before, and I appreciate that. So while we didn't have a lot of dollars in ESSER 2 devoted to learning loss, I just wanted to remind the board of the existing dollars that we do have to support extended learning. A couple important things here to note is we want to make sure that with our ESSER dollars, we're not creating unsustainable systems. So with our approach to summer learning and extended learning, we wanted to leverage the dollars that we can generally always count on so that as we expand over this summer, we can sustain that for the future. Also, there's a practical aspect of the dollars that we have in our federal grants coming in have a spend date of August 31st. So we're kind of sequencing things, but also considering sustainability. So just a quick overview. You've heard me talk about summer learning rather extensively, but to break it down in dollars, you can see how we're pulling from various funding streams to support extended learning during the summer. The vast majority of our dollars come in retreats and recovery, so that's credit recovery, that's our refresh, it's camp and retreats. There are 4 different funding streams there. Our extended school year is funded by IDEA and Fund 17. Newcomers, which is our new to the country students through Title III, preschool for all for early childhood, and then there are some Title I school-based dollars for some school-based program. But overall, our investment in extended learning this year is $7.6 million. So we wanted to make sure that we told that part of our commitment as well. And that's it.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, one quick question on the Title I funds, the 4.3 million. How does that compare to what we would normally have for a summer?
That's an excellent question. I believe it is roughly $1 million greater than what we generally spend, but I will get that comparison so that I don't misspeak.
I suspect it's more. And do we know if, and I know you can't predict these things, but is there any sense of commitment to longer term learning loss funding like this through Title I, you know, for over a number of years?
What's interesting is, as a result of the pandemic, the federal government has kind of loosened the rules on what Title I can be used for, and that now includes credit recovery. So while we don't know for sure whether that will just be a rule for this summer or whether that's something that the federal government will support moving forward, we know that we have that now, and then we'll just keep, you know, our ear to the ground on any rules that change. Okay, thank you.
Is there, before you go, I'm sorry, is there any money in there for students who are taking dual credit, at, you know, who have to retake, or at Rock Valley, some of that Running Start program, any of that kind of piece?
No, only if they're taking a course in our high schools for high school credit, they would have the credit recovery option there.
So the
but no, we
recovery
don't have
doesn't
dual credit.
apply to that level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, so the only other thing my committee has is the one consent item we have for the next board meeting. Mr. Phillips already stole my thunder and told you about it. It's an RFQ for engineering services to assist in the planning and design for these ESSER-funded projects. And that'll be coming before us at the May 11th meeting. That ends the report of my committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Mr. Rollins, can you tell us if we're, you know, is anything moving forward with the sales tax piece that we had all the presentation on? And
Not that I'm aware of, no.
okay, because that will come through your committee, will it not?
Yes.
All right. So the items for the governance committee, there are consent agenda items for the next meeting, 5/11/21, include the following: the meeting minutes, the contract purchase orders, a memorandum of understanding with the RBMA, Rockford Building and Maintenance, the IEA, and a memorandum of understanding with the Educational Office Personnel Association, and a memorandum of understanding with the Educational Interpreters Association. If you'll remember, those first two, we are rolling over the contracts, and that will be in your information. The Educational Interpreters Association is not a rollover, though. Is that correct, Ms. Simmons? That is negotiated a new contract with them. So just the first two are the rollover. The IMRF credit authorization, the workers' compensation settlement, compensation settlement, the Freedom of Information log. For the meeting on the 25th, we will also have minutes, contract purchase orders, workman's compensation settlement, and another Freedom of Information log. Do you have any questions about the items coming forward for action? Okay, then before we move on, do we have any speakers? Okay, having no speakers. If there are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I'll take a motion and second to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor, please. Any opposed? Same sign. We are adjourned at 7:30. Good job.